The war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel has entered a volatile stage, with both sides projecting confidence while signaling sharply different conditions for ending the conflict. Iranian officials insist they hold the strategic advantage and will determine when hostilities end, while the United States leadership claims its military objectives are nearly complete and predicts a swift conclusion to the war. The confrontation, which began in late February 2026 with coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian targets, has rapidly expanded across the Middle East, disrupting global energy markets and raising fears of broader regional instability. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has made clear that Tehran is prepared to continue fighting for as long as it deems necessary. The Iranian leadership has also rejected proposals for a ceasefire and dismissed the possibility of renewed negotiations with Washington. At the same time, U.S. President Donald Trump has projected confidence about the outcome of the war, claiming American and allied forces have already inflicted decisive damage on Iran's military capabilities. However, reports from within the administration suggest some advisors are urging caution amid rising economic pressure and political risks. Iranian officials say that requests for a ceasefire have been communicated through diplomatic channels by several countries. However, Tehran insists that it will not halt its military operations without guarantees that further attacks will not occur. Abbas Araghchi said the cessation of this war is in the hands of the Islamic Republic of Iran. According to him, the conflict began with acts of aggression against Iran, and Tehran will not simply agree to a ceasefire without assurances that such actions will not happen again. He explained that some governments, including countries from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, have reached out in hopes of mediating the conflict. Abbas Araghchi said some of them are actually willing to act to stop this war or establish a ceasefire. Despite those diplomatic efforts, Tehran insists it cannot accept a temporary halt in hostilities unless certain conditions are fulfilled. Abbas Araghchi said we must actually stop when we can feel or have a guarantee that these aggressive actions will not happen again and that they will accept full responsibility for their own actions. Iranian officials argue that agreeing to an immediate ceasefire without such guarantees would leave the country vulnerable to renewed attacks. The foreign minister rejected the idea that Iran would simply accept a demand to stop fighting without addressing the underlying causes of the war. Abbas Araghchi said it's not like they'll just come today and say stop, and ceasefire, and we'll say very well, and it's all over. In his remarks, Araghchi also claimed that Iran currently holds the upper hand in the conflict, arguing that the United States, Israel, and their allies have failed to achieve their objectives. Abbas Araghchi said, we currently hold the upper hand. He asserted that Iranian forces have inflicted significant damage on their adversaries, both militarily and economically. Abbas Araghchi said the Islamic Republic of Iran has inflicted severe and painful losses upon the Zionist regime, America, and their allies. Iranian officials have also pointed to disruptions in the global economy and energy markets as evidence of the broader impact of the war. The conflict has caused volatility in oil markets, with prices rising sharply amid concerns about potential disruption to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian leaders argue that these disruptions demonstrate the effectiveness of their response to the U.S.-Israeli offensive. Abbas Araghchi said, just observe the state of the global economy and energy. This is extremely painful for them. Tehran believes these pressures will eventually force its adversaries to reconsider the continuation of military operations. Abbas Araghchi said, therefore, the Islamic Republic of Iran will determine the end of the war. In addition to rejecting ceasefire proposals, the Iranian foreign minister also signaled that diplomatic engagement with Washington is no longer being considered. Abbas Araghchi said negotiations with the United States were no longer on the agenda. This statement reflects the deep breakdown in relations between Tehran and Washington following the outbreak of the war. Iranian officials say that previous diplomatic efforts were undermined by continued military pressure. While Iran projects defiance, the White House is presenting a very different picture of the war's trajectory. Speaking to reporters, President Donald Trump expressed confidence that the conflict could end in the near future. Donald Trump said, I think soon, very soon. Trump suggested that Iranian leadership structures have already been severely weakened by the military campaign. Donald Trump said everything they have is gone, including their leadership. He further claimed that multiple levels of Iran's command structure have been eliminated during the operation. Donald Trump said 2 levels of leadership are gone. The president described the military operation as powerful and effective. Donald Trump said it's obviously been very, very powerful, very effective. Trump has repeatedly emphasized the strength of the U.S. military campaign and suggested that Iran's ability to project power across the region has been dramatically reduced. Donald Trump said we're winning very decisively. He argued that the United States had acted to prevent Iran from dominating the Middle East and threatening its allies. Donald Trump said Iran's a very powerful country. They were going to take over the Middle East if we did not hit them. According to Trump, Iranian missile stockpiles and other weapon systems posed a major regional threat before the strikes. Donald Trump said they had thousands and thousands of missiles and everything else. He claimed that most of those weapons have now been destroyed. Donald Trump said most are now destroyed. The president also suggested that the operation prevented an imminent attack on Israel.
Donald Trump said they were going to try and destroy Israel. So we stopped it with good timing. Trump praised the performance of the U.S. Armed Forces during the campaign. Donald Trump said, our military is the greatest in the world with the greatest equipment and the greatest people in the world. Despite his confident rhetoric, Trump has also indicated that the United States does not seek a prolonged war.
Donald Trump said it's going to be ended soon, and if it starts up again, they'll be hit even harder. The president suggested that future U.S. support for Iran's population could depend on political changes inside the country. Donald Trump said they're great people, amazing, smart, brilliant, energetic. However, he criticized Iran's governing system. Donald Trump said they have to be in a system that allows them to be helped. Trump argued that the current political system in Iran prevents cooperation and development. Donald Trump said right now they're in a system that only allows failure. He framed the war as part of an effort to achieve long-term peace. Donald Trump said we want a system that can lead to many years of peace, even as Trump projects confidence. Reports suggest that some officials within his administration are worried about the consequences of a prolonged war. Several advisors have encouraged the president to develop an exit strategy for the United States as economic pressures grow and political risks increase. The concerns are driven in part by the economic impact of the conflict. Oil prices have surged sharply during the crisis, fueling worries about inflation and global energy supply. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage through which a large portion of the world's oil supply normally passes, has become a focal point of the conflict, increasing fears of disruption to global energy markets. Political considerations inside the United States are also shaping the debate over how long the war should continue. Public opinion polls suggest that many Americans are wary of a prolonged military confrontation with Iran. Some lawmakers are reportedly concerned about how rising energy prices and economic instability could affect upcoming elections. Advisors close to the president are said to have urged the White House to communicate a clearer strategy for ending the conflict and explaining the war's objectives to the public. However, the administration has strongly rejected suggestions that it is looking for a way out of the war. The White House insists that the president and his team remain focused on achieving what they consider a successful outcome to the military operation. Officials argue that the campaign has already weakened Iran's capabilities and improved security for regional allies. Meanwhile, the war has already produced significant consequences across the Middle East. Iran has launched retaliatory attacks on Israel, U.S. military positions, and several regional targets. These attacks have included missile and drone strikes aimed at military infrastructure and strategic facilities. The escalation has also raised concerns that the conflict could draw additional countries into direct confrontation. International leaders have repeatedly called for restraint and urged both sides to pursue diplomatic solutions. Despite the strong rhetoric from both Tehran and Washington, the future of the conflict remains uncertain. Iran insists it will not stop fighting until it receives guarantees against further aggression and acknowledgement of responsibility from its adversaries. Meanwhile, the United States says its military campaign has already achieved most of its objectives and predicts the conflict will end soon. These conflicting narratives highlight the complexity of the situation. For Iran, the war is portrayed as a defensive struggle imposed from outside. For the United States and its allies, it is framed as a necessary action to neutralize a perceived regional threat. With global markets rattled, energy supplies under pressure, and diplomatic channels struggling to gain traction, the coming weeks may prove decisive. Whether the war ends quickly, as the White House predicts, or continues, as Iran suggests, will depend largely on how both sides interpret victory and what conditions they ultimately accept for peace.